This is John for MTG Nexus coming at you with another quick deck tech before we finish up a pre-recorded league for MTGO with Boros Burn. As a friendly reminder, if you like modern content, please consider subscribing to the channel, as we aim to be the most informative modern channel for MTG on YouTube. So back to the bread and butter of the channel, Boros Burn. This is the list that I basically have called basic Boros throughout, both immediately before and after the bannings. It's like no frills, no Luris of the Dream Den, no Chandra's Incinerator, nothing too special going on the sideboard. Just kind of your basic everyday red-white burn list. You have your traditional 12 creature suite. You have your Lava Spikes, Lightning Bolts, and Boros Charms. Basically what I consider the core of every Boros Burn list is these cards right here, as well as 19 to 20 lands. And then the various things that change up as far as the land base are the number of Sunbaked Canyons, Fiery Islets you run. I've been choosing to run 4 of late as opposed to 5. I feel the meta has been tended to be a little bit more aggressive in the leagues and such, at least earlier going on. So I was playing only 4 as opposed to 5. As far as the flex spells, I consider these 16 slots, potentially a 17th if you're only wanting to run 19 lands. It's kind of your flex slots. This is where you fit your Skull Cracks, your Searing Blazes, your Lightning Helixes, your Rift Bolts, and your Skewers. They all do a little bit differently. Obviously, Rift Bolt comes with the drawback of taking a turn, which sometimes can be a problem, especially if you're trying to chain multiple spells late in the game and you already have a card in hand. Skewer the Critics has a similar drawback to Rift Bolt, only you have to be able to trigger damage, which if you're playing against a counterspell deck can be a little bit tricky sometimes, or getting this out of your hand if you're like cycling Sunbaked Canyons only have 2 lands in hand. Can be a little bit tricky, but they both play quite nicely into your faster draws. Also, they answer creatures, which is nice. Lightning Helix, this is one of the more... This and Searing Blaze kind of go hand in hand a lot of times. Searing Blaze, obviously very good against smaller creature decks, Heliod, Combo, Burn, Prowess, Mirrors, some creatures in Death Shadow, etc. Lightning Helix helps you race in the Mirrors and against the Prowess decks. And then Skullcrack, obviously life gain can be a problem for Burn, so having some number of anti-life gain things in the main deck. You can consider moving the Skullcracks to the sideboard, having 4 Lightning Helixes. There's a lot of different configurations you can do with Burn, but this is the configuration we're rolling with in this particular league. As far as the sideboard, 4 Path to Exile. This is a number that's a little bit high, perhaps. I've noticed in a lot of the mid-range matchups, like Jund in particular with Liliana, I might only want to bring in 2 or 3. You can get flooded on Path to Exile sometimes. Sometimes it's the only card that answers, keeps you alive. So it's a bit of a mixture. Generally you're boarding out some type of damage dealer to bring this in. This allows your creatures to get through with more damage potentially. Also buys you more time to top deck more burn spells. So it's kind of a, is Path to Exile going to buy you 2 turns as opposed to it just being a burn spell? Core Firewalker, Red Mirrors basically, Burn and Prowess have been kind of everywhere earlier in the meta. Starting to taper off a little bit, so maybe in future leagues we might go down to 2 Core Firewalker. We'll see. Roiling Vortex, this is kind of one of the more controversial ones right now, or, kind of flex that a lot of people aren't running, or maybe they're running like 2 of. I held extra ones in here in case people were still trying to do, cascading into whatever, whether it be Living End or whatnot. Also pretty good against the Electro Dominance decks, just randomly. Decent against things like Pacts, Pact of Negation, Summoner's Pact, etc. And it is a nice anti-life gain thing. The problem with it is it's a little bit, it's a turn of setup usually. It's really good in the non-creature mirror matches, sometimes Jund, but Blue-White X Control, any of those kind of random decks that, you're not staring down a lot of pressure early on. Nice to get this down, start ticking away. Can be a little bit slow towards stopping life gain, but in the mid to late game, this is probably one of your best cards towards stopping things like timely reinforcements and such. 2 Wear Tear. Most people prefer Smash to Smithereens. Early in the format, I was expecting more Leyline of Sanctities with Boggles and stuff kind of popping up. Just random nonsense. Can bring it in against Blood Moon, but generally if you're expecting Blood Moon, you can board out more of your white cards. And a lot of times the Blood Moon deck isn't going to even leave in too many Blood Moons against you simply because it's generally not all that great against burn. Finally, 3 copies of Relic of Progenitus, probably the most unique part of my lists. A lot of people, when Uro was a thing, were using, Surgical Extraction, Rest in Peace, etc. I've always found that in the value-based mid-range decks that I prefer Relic of Progenitus, and it's worse against Dredge, especially now that they're starting to bring in things like Pithing Needle and such. But overall, in the dark, I do like Relic of Progenitus just as it's kind of a value card against, Tarmogoyf decks and such, which are a steady part of the format. Jun's performing decently well. Jun Death Shadow has been okay. Grixis Death Shadows popped up here and there. Snapcaster Mage decks. Still a lot of reasons to have a value graveyard hate-based card, whereas I might not want to bring in something like Rest in Peace in those matchups, but I'm perfectly fine like playing a Relic on turn 1 or turn 2. And just kind of keeping the graveyard in check, making Tarmogoyf small, making the game go a little bit longer. And, on a key turn, be able to cycle this looking for more action. So, it's the primary reason. Somebody asked me in one of my previous videos to go a little bit more into why Relic of Progenitus over Rest in Peace. Rest in Peace is definitely better when you're facing more dedicated graveyard decks. Decks like Dredge, decks like Oops All Spells. Any type of Hollow One nonsense. Rest in Peace is definitely better, but Relic is better in kind of the grindy mid-range-ish, where you don't necessarily have a lot of cards to bring in those matchups. Depending if they're Jun, you might bring in Paths. And Rolling Vortexes, if they're blue-white control, you want something to bring in addition to Rolling Vortexes for your Searing Blazes. Relic kind of fits that role quite nicely as well. I know some people were talking about potentially like Exquisite Firecraft against blue-white X-Specs decks. The problem with Firecraft, and part of the reason I went away from the card to begin with, because it's been a card much like Deflecting Palm that I used to absolutely love, is Aethergust is a thing, and while your deck is already taxing Aethergust quite a bit, the big thing about Exquisite Firecraft is your ability to kind of, just kill them with one spell, and Aethergust can buy them a turn or two, which can be often, kind of what Exquisite Firecraft is designed to do, is to stop those like racing situations against like Jeskai or Blue-White, where they have maybe a Snapcaster Mage and a Shark, beating you down, and you're trying to kill them through their Force of Negation and Aethergust combination. So there are some spots where it's still fine, I'm sure, and I'm sure if you want to try that card out, it's worth exploring. But this was the configuration I used in this particular league that we're going to be doing the replay on. That said, let's get into the final 2 matches in this league. Okay, we're back for match number 1. Game number 1, we're on the draw. Opponent chose to play first. Looking at our opening hand, it's pretty reasonable. 3 lands. We have overall 12 damage of spells. So going by GG for Goblin Guides, opening guide of 10 damage in the dark seems pretty reasonable. Also have a redraw potentially in the mid-game. The one weakness of this hand is no early interaction for creatures, as well as no early pressure from creatures. So, we're dependent on our burn spells to close out the game, which could be a little bit risky, especially if we have to turn the resources onto creatures. But overall, 3 lands, 4 spells, pretty reasonable keep. But also kept their 7 leads on Seachrome Coast. Seachrome Coast used to mean Ad Nauseam, but with Ad Nauseam no longer in the format, kind of hard to tell. And then Ghost Quarter kind of gives up the jig that it's probably some style of Death and Taxes deck. Want to use our fetches here. While we want to keep fetches normal under most circumstances for Searing Blaze effects as long as possible against this deck, we just really don't want to get caught with a Leonin Arbiter. Opponent attacks first. We don't block. We play Swizzle Spear first. Go to a combat. I do this. Might be a little too cute. I'm playing around Spell Queller here, which they might not have been too incentivized to use on that. And then play the Eidolon post-combat. And it turns out our opponent actually has a Spell Queller. So this is kind of unfortunate for us, as we've taken a lot of damage and our opponent can just kind of race us, making our spells ineffectual here. They play a Deputy of Detention, getting rid of our Swift Spear, and we're kind of quasi-locked under our own Eidolon. I mean, I could take my turn here, like Helix one of these things, but we're just so far behind here. This might have been a premature concession, but we'd go to 3, or sorry, we'd go to 2, back to 5, and then take 4 most likely. And our own Eidolons kind of lock us if they choose not to attack with this, and they just attack with the Queller. So maybe the line here was to Helix this, keep back the Eidolons, but then they can continue to cast spells and we're locked. Especially since our Sunbaked Canyons, we took a lot of damage that game from our lands and Eidolons. That's why you'll see me sometimes fetch basics more aggressively whenever I have an Eidolon in my opening hand, but you know, we didn't have one in our opening hand that time, so maybe it took a little bit too much damage, plus our opponent had a decently aggressive start while disrupting what we had going on, and not taking any damage from their lands really kind of hurts our strategy. So let's go to game number 2 and sideboarding. Sideboarding for Death and Taxes. Death and Taxes is a bit of a tricky deck. They have, you know, a lot of different resources. They have Skyclave Apparitions. They might have various Stoneblade packages. It's kind of hard to, you know exactly what they have going on. As far as what's in our sideboard that we would want to bring in, Path, and to a lesser extent, we might want to bring in Roiling Vortex. I'd rather have Roiling Vortex over Eidolon because they are generally an Aether Vial deck, and Eidolon and Aether Vial are kind of a combo for us. They get to cast their spells for no damage, we take damage. Not a pretty combo. That and Eidolon kind of gets blanked by a lot of their beaters. And then the other card to board out, Boros Charms. You know, leaving 1 isn't terrible. Leaving 2 in possibly is fine. You know, possibly you could argue that it's better than Roiling Vortex. Opening hand here, pretty good, other than we're taking a decent bit of damage. We have 2 creatures, a Searing Blaze. You know, 2 Searing Blazes seems like a pretty good keep against the all-creature deck. Opponent mulligans to 5. We play Goblin Guide. They get a Mutavault, play their land. We crack, play the thing. Do that, take a little bit less damage. They reveal Spell Queller. Opponent plays a Core Firewalker, which is unfortunate. It's possible I wasn't supposed to cycle here, because now I don't get like to even bluff an attack. And they have Spell Skite. Makes our job extremely difficult. Once again, I'm not fetching, which might be a mistake. We have Aethersworn Canonist. I missed a point of damage here because I am a dodo bird. Would have given us a prowess trigger. So, no, I guess I didn't mess up here. What I didn't want is my opponent to path. Why did I not play this spell here? I guess because I didn't want them to path the Spellskite or have some type of nonsense to kind of negate this until the damage was already done with Goblin God. So I guess that was my thinking there, but I just think that was a mistake. That point of damage probably could be relevant at some point. We'll go ahead and fetch there. Attack with that, because once again, Core Firewalker, pretty free block. We kill the thing. It's possible I'm supposed to bolt there just to get in more damage. Once again, that would be another point of damage that we're kind of missing out on. We're flooding out a little bit here. Once again, oh no, we know about the Spell Queller, so actually that's why we're not playing the bolts out. Go ahead and path that. They have Spell Stutter Sprite, which completely obliterates us. I try to get cute and bolt the sprite. They just activate Mutavault, so I kind of get blown out for no good reason here. And opponent once again should be at 7. They have Giver of Runes. Crack, get a Goblin Guide. Play. How am I not playing the Goblin Guide here? I guess because we don't want them gaining extra life. They play Deputy of Detention. We play our dudes out. Hopefully punch through a bit of damage, but Giver of Runes here is going to be tricky. I kind of get a free block. Once again, we're flooding out a little bit, but our opponent has Giver of Runes and Leonin Arbiter. crack the fetch in response to the Arbiter. They continue to chunk away at our life total here. And this might have been a bit of a premature concession. I know this matchup was immediately after the other matchup with green-white taxes that was in one of the last videos, where our opponent used some tricky stuff with ghost quarters and such. We had all creatures and all lands, which is pretty bad against what our opponent's doing in particular. Basically, all of our spells become shocks to the face. And our opponent's just getting to the point where they're just going to be able to punch through enough damage. That said, still might have been a premature concession here. Maybe could have played out another turn. There's probably a little bit of tilt going on here at this point, but I do think we were definitely a huge underdog at this point. But our opponent realistically should have been in 6 the way we stack damage. With prowess triggers and such, but I forgot that I knew about the spell queller, so that explained a little bit of my strange plays. But, and they still had spell queller in their hand at that point. That might also have contributed to me conceding here. So, because they get they get, Core Firewalker, all that nonsense. So, or is the spell queller still in their hand? Yeah, spell queller still in their hand because they used the spell stutter sprite in the spot where I thought they were going to use spell queller, and that really blew us out. Not gonna lie, that was a huge blowout. Especially not a card on my radar because they don't really play that many fairies, so to speak. They literally play Spell Stutter Sprite, Mutavault, and maybe Brazen Burrower. Maybe. Obviously we didn't see it out of them, but that doesn't mean it doesn't exist. Spell Queller is a spirit to my knowledge, but. Interesting deck opponent has. They get some of the elements of Death and Taxes and some of the elements of Spirits to their deck. Makes it a little bit tricky to play against. Giver of Runes and Spellskite, they were definitely prepared for the burn matchup, so sometimes you lose some. Alright, on to the next match. Alright, we're back for the second match in this video. Fortunately, we're on the draw. Take a look at our opening hand, shall we? Opening hand is interesting. I think on the play this hand isn't a keep because of the 1 land risk. On the draw, a little bit better. We have the 2/1 drops plus the Riftbolt to play, if nothing else, so I do think this hand's a keep. Our opponent mulled to 6. They play an Elf. So we miss on our land drop. And this mulligan seems premature, and I'm not saying it's not. But now we know what our opponent is playing. And Elves is generally a good matchup if you can steal a game. I chose to mulligan here because Eidolon, even if we hit a second land drop, isn't coming down until way too late after they've probably emptied most of their hand, and Riftbolt is just going to be too slow to deal with their creatures. And we have no other form of interacting with creatures. And the thing with Elves is control their board, control their board, control the board, no longer control their board, kill them. Or you play Eidolon onto, let them kill themselves, and then burn them out. This hand does none of those things. We could try to Goblin Guide and Race, but they're pretty good at clogging up the board turn 2, turn 3 if you can't answer their 1-drop Elf. So I choose to concede this game because we're very unlikely to win from here, and this kind of hides information as to what's going on. Looking at sideboarding against Elves, it's pretty simple. You board out your Boros Charms, you board in the Path Exiles. That's pretty much all there is. You could potentially bring in Roiling Vortex. They don't usually have a ton of life gain. They could have, like, Weather the Storm or something. This hand, not the best, because you really don't want to be ramping Elves, but we have Swift Spear plus we have Pressure plus Removal, so good enough hand, especially on the play when you're already down a game. You don't want to go down too far. Obviously play with the Swizzle Spear and pressure them. They play their Elf and pass. We use Lightning Helix here. Give them a chance to block first. Obviously they choose not to. We just Helix because it's the most mana efficient play. Opponent goes, does the thing. We draw about the best possible card here. Swing in here. They choose not to block. We kill their dude. Once again, a little bit risky. They play Realm Walker, which I find really interesting that they shocked for that. This allows us to kill them quite easily. You know, so don't know if they were supposed to fetch that. That generally means they probably had at least one Shaman of the Pack in hand, or maybe like a Collective Brutality they might have brought in the dark. But I think this might have cost them the game, although they were so far behind with the cards. You know, we just had a really good hand. We were able to control their board long enough to kill them. That Searing Blaze was definitely the best top deck, and so sometimes situations you gotta get a little bit lucky to top deck and also keep a good hand overall. So let's go to the deciding game number 3. Didn't really see any need to change things with sideboarding, so submitted the same 60. We're on the draw here, which makes things a little bit tougher. Sand doesn't have any creatures, but we have double Searing Blaze and a Lightning Bolt, so yeah, I think we're gonna keep this hand. We're kind of priced into bolting the bird here, so to speak, just to keep their mana underdeveloped. Use the Searing Blaze on the Swarm Master so they can't go wide and have a threat of its ultimate, so to speak. Well, it gets to go wide here anyway. So now we're starting to get to the point where we can't really control our board. Interesting decision here is, do we Searing Blaze to continue to stifle their development, or do we try to get Eidolon down and get some damage out of that? I choose to stifle their development. Holding up Path here might have been incorrect. Shaman of the Pack, trigger on the stack, we path Shaman. They're running low on resources, so their derpy 1/1 beats could be a little bit tricky. I decide to play the Eidolon here, holding the Mountain in hand. Grizzly Bear ends up being the king of the jungle. They have Weather the Storm, which is a card that I mentioned before they might have. You know, the two cards they could likely have are like Weather the Storm and Scavenging Ooze are the two that like kind of fit best into their strategy. I kind of screwed up here. I probably should have played the Lightning Helix first, but I think we just want to keep their important creatures under control here. You know, they play Shaman of the Pack. I did kind of goof here. I probably should have Helixed that in response. You know, just to prevent this nonsense from happening. Maybe it incentivized them to attack in a situation where they wouldn't be in a good spot. I attack with one of my creatures. This effectively locks them with every card in their deck except for Collected Company. And obviously we can't cast spells either. This forces them to block. And then they go to 1, and then we kill them with Rift Bolt. They have Weather the Storm, which obviously a little bit awkward. They go to 2. Once again, they can't cast any spells. And the game is over because they can't cast anything other than Collected Company here. And, yeah. Sometimes you win really close games against Elves. So, anywho, that's going to be it for this video. Once again, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe if you like modern content, especially burn stuff. And, once again, hope to see you in the next video.